Well, thanks everybody for coming this morning. I really appreciate you coming out to listen. So, I'm Bruce Skarin, an independent candidate for United States Senate, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about citizenship in a republic. And before I get into that, I'm going to talk about these three questions that I really asked myself before I decided to run for the U.S. Senate, and that I'm now asking you and every voter that I encounter. And that first one is, are you satisfied with the system of government and politics that we have today? And I've done an online survey with that, and I've talked with people on the street, and so far, 100% of people are not satisfied. They are unsatisfied or greater. The other question I've asked is, so, given that things are so wrong, what is it that we should be working on? What are the priorities for our country? And as you see, what comes back is a lot of the same issues being ranked in the order that we kind of know and that politicians like to talk about. That number one issue there of corruption, of money in politics, of a broken partisan system is not being talked about at all by any other politician. And I'll get more into that in a little bit. But the point is if you look at each one of these issues and you ask yourself, how much are we actually accomplishing on these? You can see there's a pretty big gap between what's happening and what it is that's important to us. And the last question is, what are you willing to do about it? And before I talk about that, I want to tell three stories about three individuals that kind of illustrate the path that we're on right now and our opportunity to do something about it. The first is an entrepreneur, a professor, and then a civic innovator. Now, the entrepreneur here is Elon Musk. And there's a lot that I could talk about this gentleman. I could talk about how he got his life started in the business world creating PayPal, and how he later sold that for millions of dollars, which he then used to fund investments in companies like SolarCity, one of the most successful solar companies out there. I could talk about the Tesla Model S, which is not only the first practical electric car, but also the highest rated car ever in terms of safety, quality, and performance. What I really want to talk about today, though, is this. Shown here is the Falcon 9R for reusable. Now, one of the problems with spaceflight right now, one of the main cost barriers, is the fact that the most expensive part, the rocket, is thrown away every single time. Fuel is only 0.3% of the cost of a rocket flight. The rest is in building the rocket and operations. Now, up until this point, it hasn't been possible to really recover these in a way that's effective and practical. But what Elon and the folks at SpaceX have figured out is how to take a 22-story rocket. So you can imagine taking a 22-story broom handle and balancing that on your hand. And this video here is showing a demonstration of that capability. But just last week, they actually did, for the first time in history, had a boost stage rocket come back, use this technology to come to a complete stop over the ocean before making the first soft landing of a boost stage, making it possible to pave the way for recovering a rocket. Now, when this technology is perfected, we're talking about a 100-fold reduction in the cost of space flight. And it's basically a game changer. I'm going to let it go ahead and come down so you can see that the thing does come back intact. The magic is that in their attempt last week, they gave it about a 30 to 40% chance of success, and they did it first time. So it bodes well for being able to do this in the future. But this is not why Elon Musk is suing the Air Force here just last month. He's suing the Air Force because they just granted United Launch Alliance 36 sole source launches at $400 million each. So what sole source means is that they didn't have to even compete it. They didn't even have to ask if anybody else could come out and make an offer for providing a cost improvement on that. What's worse about this is that the Russian engines that these rockets use most likely violate sanctions as a result of what's going on here in the Ukraine. And because they didn't ask SpaceX what they could do rockets for, taxpayers are going to pay a cost 4 times as much as what he's already able to do now without even having the reusable rocket aspect. So of this $14.4 billion that was just handed out without any bids, without any competition, could save taxpayers over $10 billion. Now, in response to the sanctions, Russia's Deputy Prime Minister, Dmitry Rogozin, tweeted this: "After analyzing the sanctions against our space industry, I suggest the U.S. delivers its astronauts to the ISS, the International Space Station, with a trampoline." To which Elon responds, "Sounds like this might be a good time to unveil the new Dragon Mark II spaceship that SpaceX has been working with NASA to get certified for human flight. No trampoline needed." Now, while this all makes good theater, and while SpaceX lawsuit is probably a slam dunk, they've already got an injunction from the judge to prevent contracts from going forward, and more than likely they will be able to bid, and they will be able to compete, and they will be able to save taxpayers money. And that's good. But the fact that it happened in the first place says an awful lot. And that happens over and over and over again. We got to ask ourselves, why? In this day and age, is that really acceptable? That when we have technology advance, that we let things like this happen? This is my answer. The system is broken. I'm a systems guy. That's my background. I've been doing it for 10 years, looking at problems that are pretty much too hard to understand without the help of computers, in order to see how it's not just one thing. It's not just one little issue that if we fix that and then everything else goes away. It's an entire system surrounded. And that means that our system is now corrupt. Which brings us to the end of that first story and into the next. Now, the professor here is from Harvard. His name is Lawrence Larry Lessig. And when I first started getting interested in figuring out why these types of things are happening in our government, it naturally led to Congress, the institution that is supposed to be setting the direction for our country and that is supposed to be something of a source of pride because it stands for the people. But what I found is that it stands instead for the funders. It really is all about the Benjamins, baby. And finding money in politics led me to Larry, who's been working for 7 years now trying to raise awareness on this issue of corruption. And he's doing something different than anybody else. He's not talking about just campaign finance reform, because he says that's like telling someone who's an alcoholic that they have a liquid intake problem. It's sugarcoating the truth, which is that the system has been corrupted by this money. And as a result, it no longer represents us. Now, Larry's been doing a variety of things. He formed a group called Root Strikers that's been active. But this last January, he did something that really put action on the road. It was called the New Hampshire Rebellion. And it started on January 11th, on the one-year anniversary of the death of this boy and good friend of Larry Lessig's, who first introduced him to the idea that his interests in copyright reform were never going to go anywhere until he addressed that issue of money in politics. And so to honor Aaron, we began a journey that started in Dixville Notch and marched all the way down to Nashua, traveling 185 miles, and ending on January 24th, which would be the birthday of this woman. Her name is Doris Haddock, but she's more commonly known as Granny D, who at age 88 in 1999 set out from California and walked 3,200 miles to help bring attention to this issue of campaign finance reform and help McCain-Feingold get passed. That legislation which the Supreme Court has now completely disassembled. And she said that was okay because it was just a draft. Just because you fail the first time that you try something does not mean that it's not something that needs to be done. So I walked with this group of people and discovered the true power of getting out and doing something, of talking with people. We went from the first day of walking in freezing rain with people driving by with questioning looks to the very next day to having people put signs out in their yard, to start honking and waving, to stop and thank us for what we were doing. So that by the time that we got down to Nashua, just about everybody knew that we were coming, and it was a steady stream of people showing their support. And we did all that with the goal of escalating this up to 2016 to make sure that every single presidential candidate was asked and recorded and reported on this question: how are you going to end the system of corruption? So that every presidential candidate knows that this is the #1 priority for New Hampshire citizens and the rest of America. But as we know, the president can only do so much. So we have to look at Congress. So we came up with this other idea that just on May 1st was launched, and here's Larry in his own words describing it.
Since the early 1920s, aviators and mariners have used the word Mayday to signal distress and to call for aid. And on the sea, at least, when another captain hears that call, there's an obligation, a moral obligation, to lend aid. We are calling a Mayday on this democracy. Across this country, Americans on the left and the right have come to the view that our government is broken, and more than 90% of us link that failure to the role of money in politics. While infrastructure collapses, while our schools fail, while we have a healthcare system that costs too much and does too little, while climate change remains totally unaddressed, while our tax system remains a gift to those who can afford to lobby for loopholes, politicians from both parties still spend endless time raising money from the tiniest fraction of the 1%. And as a recent study from Princeton confirms, the result of this fundraising culture is a government that is responsive to that tiny fraction of the 1%, while, quote, average American citizens have little or no independent influence, end quote.
Little or no independent influence. I think we all know this inherently. We know that we can't just walk into a fundraiser and talk to our senator or talk to our representative. That takes money. That takes access. And as a result, we really have no meaningful form of representation anymore. So what they did is they started this Mayday call for our democracy, and they didn't spend any money advertising it. They just put it out within the networks that they have. with the goal of raising a grassroots super PAC. Not a super PAC that's a collection of billionaires, but a super PAC that is a collection of individual citizens with the aim of influencing 5 elections here in 2014, and the total goal of winning a majority in both the Senate and the House of people that are committed to fundamental reform when it comes to money in politics. And so what happened? We, the people, answered the call. We answered over and over and over again to the point where the infrastructure that was supporting this site began to crack. And only through the heroic efforts of volunteers did they manage to keep the site up and have one of the biggest days, raising over $200,000 in just 24 hours, without $1 spent on advertising. We, the people, really do want change. We want things to change. We just don't know how to do it. Which brings an end to the story and gets us to our last one, our civic innovator. This is Jen Palka, and she helped start Code for America, which is kind of like a Peace Corps or a Teach for America for geeks that put technology professionals right in town halls, right in state governments, and did a boot camp of sorts, creating a wide range of innovative projects that could be reused across the country. And here she is talking about some of those projects.
We had a team that worked on a project in Boston last year that took 3 people about 2.5 months. It was a way that parents could figure out which were the right public schools for their kids. We were told afterwards that if that had gone through normal channels, it would have taken at least 2 years, and it would have cost about $2 million. And that's nothing. There is one project in the California court system right now that so far cost taxpayers $2 billion, and it doesn't work. And there are projects like this at every level of government. So an app that takes, a couple of days to write and then spreads virally, that's sort of a shot across the bow to the institution of government. It suggests how government could work better. Not more like a private company, as many people think it should, and not even more like a tech company, but more like the internet itself. And that means permissionless, it means open, it means generative. And that's important. But what's more important about this app is that it represents how a new generation is tackling the problem of government. Not as the problem of an ossified institution, but as a problem of collective action. And that's great news, because it turns out we're very good at collective action with digital technology. There's a very large community of people that are building the tools that we need to do things together effectively. It's not just Code for America fellows. There are hundreds of people all over the country that are standing and writing civic apps every day in their own communities. They haven't given up on government. They are frustrated as hell with it, but they're not complaining about it. They're fixing it. And these folks know something that we've lost sight of. And that's that when you strip away all your feelings about politics and the line at the DMV and all those other things that we're really mad about, government is, at its core, in the words of Tim O'Reilly, what we do together that we can't do alone.
Government is what we do together that we cannot do alone. It is a republic, a representative democracy, where each of us have some small say that is to be represented in our government. And then when we do that, when we act as citizens, that we make things better for all of us. We do things that don't just help ourselves, that help the entire country. Now, when I was going through a bit of a rough patch, a colleague of mine sent me this quote from Teddy Roosevelt, and it goes like this: "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds. Now, a lot of people might think that Teddy was talking about folks like Elon, Larry, and Jennifer, but he wasn't. One of the things that I like to do when I get quotes like that is actually go find the source, find the rest of the context about what that speaker was talking about. And this is how he began. A speech called Citizenship and Republic that he gave in France at a university. He said, "Today I shall speak to you on the subject of individual citizenship. A democratic republic such as ours represents the most gigantic of all possible social experiments, the one fraught with great responsibilities alike for good and evil. The success of republics means the glory, and our failure the despair of mankind. And for you and for us, the question of the quality of the individual citizen is supreme. The quality of the individual citizen is supreme." So when Teddy was talking about that man in the arena, he was not talking about great leaders. He was talking about hardworking people that were doing everything they could to make ends meet and to help move our country forward. So that brings us back to that last question. What are you willing to do about it? What can we do about it? We understand the problem. Check that off. That's always the first step into creating solutions, is to understand the problem. The question is, what do we do now? In this day and age where we have technology possible to bring rockets back from supersonic speed and land them so that they can be reused, in a day and age when we have technology that can create platforms that people can use in government right now within a matter of months, instead of costing hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars or even billions of dollars, how do we go about making that happen? Let me tell you what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to run for U.S. Senate to restore representation here to the people of Massachusetts. I'm willing to do that by going and walking town by town, covering a 1,000-mile route, talking to ordinary people, not running around meeting with special interests after special interests or all the usual interest groups and asking them to support me and to give me large amounts of money. I want to go and talk to ordinary people and find out, is there anybody that's satisfied? Now, I think this chart should probably have maybe a little 1% that's very satisfied in there, but I'm afraid I do not know any of those people. I want to know what people's priorities are, and I want to have this be an ongoing conversation, which is why I've created a platform that allows me to listen to voters. I also want to turn around our current funding paradigm, which collects huge amounts of money from a tiny number of people. I want to take that and I want to turn it over on its head, and I want to collect just a tiny amount of money from a huge number of people. Why is that worthwhile? 12 cents. 12 cents is what it cost in the special election last year for the incumbent to buy the votes. This is the cost per vote. Buy your votes, to manipulate voters to going to the polls and casting their ballots for the candidate. Your vote is not owned. The Democrats don't own it. The Republicans don't own it. Your vote belongs to you. So here's what I want to do. I want to take all that money that would be wasted on annoying attack ads that we use to manipulate people, and I want to throw those things in the garbage, And I want to invest. I want to invest in getting the best possible information on using my background as a scientist and an engineer, and not a career politician, to get to the root of problems and solve them. Problems like creating comprehensive campaign finance reform. Now, the Government by the People Act that's in the House and the Fair Elections Now Act are both good bills and should be seeing widespread support based on what Americans want. But right now, that's not happening. That's why Larry is forming that Mayday call, and why he's forming that PAC, is to go there and pay the ransom and get our democracy back. We need leaders in the Senate and in the House that understand this issue intimately and that can design reform that will pass constitutional muster. And we can do this. These bills already have been reviewed and don't infringe on anybody's expression to spend money and to do things. It creates a new system of incentives. I want to work on creating balance. It's a group called No Labels. It's a group of representatives and senators that are committed to putting the partisan issues aside and being problem solvers. There is not a single rep from Massachusetts that is a member of this group. That is one of the first things that I would do, is to reach out with anybody that is committed to the idea of actually solving problems instead of scoring political points. I'll work just as anybody else on bringing prosperity, but I'll do it in a way that links all the other problems that we have together with what we need from education and our economy. Problems like sustainability, moving away from an energy source that is only getting less efficient and more risky to extract, and towards one that is only getting more efficient and cheaper. It really comes down to it. When people ask me, well, why me? Why the U.S. Senate? I said, well, who should answer this call? What is your ideal candidate, given the types of problems that we have, given the level of dysfunction that we've had now? What would that person look like? And for me, I think we have enough lawyers in Congress, and that it's time that we have some scientists and engineers, people that have spent their lives and their careers solving problems. I think we should have people that are independent, that are not committed to Obama's agenda or the Tea Party agenda or anybody else's agenda, but they're independent thinkers that are willing to listen and represent their constituents just as our forefathers intended. We need somebody that's inventive, that understands the potential. I mean, it's so amazing that our economy continues on in spite of everything that our government is doing, instead of in coordination with it. Just think that if we can clear away just even a few of the problems, like the one with the no-bid contract to ULA, it could save us tens of billions of dollars, just like that. We need people that are problem solvers, that understand that there's no simple fix, that there's not some Band-Aid that can be put on things, that you have to understand problems and get to the root of them. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't see Benjamin Franklin walking through that door. Instead, I see an opportunity, a very hard and a very challenging opportunity, but I see an opportunity to go and to fight, to raise these issues, and to offer a choice. To start with that. Just start with a choice and see what happens. And see what we can do. Now, it's kind of fitting to kind of close this up with Ben Franklin, because there's a story about him coming out of the Constitutional Convention, and he was approached by a woman who was very upset, and she confronted him and she said, "Mr. Franklin, what have you wrought?" And his response was, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it. A republic. I'm willing to fight for that republic. I'm not trying to buy you out cheaply. I don't think you should sell yourself out for 12 cents. I think we all need to do something. Now, not everybody needs to walk 1,000 miles. Not everybody needs to run for U.S. Senate or any other elected office. But as citizens in a republic, I think we still have a duty to try and do what we can, what's within our means. So I ask, what are you willing to do about it? If you want to help me, there's a few things that you can do. You can sign my ballot petition to help me get on the ballot come November. You can pitch in a small amount. I'm not asking much. It's not about the quantity of dollars, but the quantity of people. You can join me for a stretch. Step outside. Remove yourselves from all the usual distractions of daily life and come and talk to your future representative. Tell them what your concerns are. Tell them what your priorities are. Have a real, meaningful conversation so that we are creating representative democracy once again. You can also make a pledge, because this is not just about my campaign. This is about a larger movement that is taking place here in the United States. And this super PAC is one way for citizens to get involved. I'm also working with other independent candidates for Senate and House to form an alliance based on some simple principles that allow us to try and maximize our influence so that neither party gets a majority, and that instead independents, those that are committed to representing everyone equally, are the deciding votes on the important issues. Now, I'm sure there's more that folks can do. There's always different groups that are out there, other ways to engage. But I think if each one of us is willing to act as citizens, we can get our republic back. And we can turn things around, and we can get things moving in a direction that we are finally proud about. That when somebody brings up politics, it's no longer something that is a toxic thing that you don't want to have anything to do with, but actually something you enjoy, something that you're proud of and that you want to be a part of. Because that's what makes these things work. And that's what ultimately needs to happen if we're ever going to have any chance of taking on these problems. So I thank everyone here for coming in and for listening. I'd be happy to take questions. And if you'd like, we'll be heading out shortly, and you can join me for the first mile, which is just down to the elementary school here, on my way to Oxford. Or you can join me for the whole day and tell me about what you're interested in, what your concerns are, and how you might like to help. So thanks again. Thanks for coming.